happens. We've been talking about grace and how it happens in our lives. And we've been saying from the book of Jonah that grace does happen. And grace is something that is more than a noun, more than something that you can look at and say that's grace, that grace is actually more like a verb. Grace actually takes place, that it transforms, that it illuminates, that it empowers, that it can actually change your perception once you understand the concept of God's free, undeserved grace. And that it could actually change people, and it could actually change a life from going one direction to going a different direction. And we've been saying that grace just keeps on coming. Like you say it might happen once, that would be great, but grace keeps coming again and again and again. And you might make a mistake, but there's grace available for you. You might make another mistake, still grace. Grace is unlimited, an unlimited resource for the undeserved. And we've been saying that there's moments in life that you can't really define any other way but to say that grace happens. It could be something as small as seeing someone smile to you, or seeing a small child's face light up. And the only way that you can describe that thing that happened in your life is grace just happened. Or it might be somebody that you treated poorly, but they respond with kindness and gentleness. And all you can say is, wow, grace just happened. That you could actually walk through your life, and if you had a stamp or you had stickers on your timeline, there's no other way to describe that season of your life except to say that grace happens. That there is forgiveness, that there is hope. Why? Because grace happens. And so God says that God's mercies are new every morning. We know that. Thank God for that. We also know that God's grace is available every moment, with every breath that we take. Once you receive God's grace, here's the thing. You experience it, you will want to pass it on. Grace never stays put. It's not like a lake that sort of gathers, oh, there's a lake of grace. Grace is more like a river. It flows. And so one of the ways that you know you've experienced grace is that you pass it on. That's the way it's intended. And if grace is not flowing through you, then something stalled it along the way. And we've seen in the book of Jonah, God's grace sort of happening over and over in his life. And so we've looked at Jonah chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. This will be the last in this series called Grace Happens, Jonah chapter 4. Each of these chapters is about 10 or 11 verses. And today we'll just sort of wind it up. And what we'll discover today is that grace is not, it's not like a warm, snuggly blanket. That there is actually times where grace has an edge to it. That sometimes grace is actually, as we've learned in Jonah, in the form of a fierce storm in our life. Sometimes grace comes to us in the form of deep restrictions. Sometimes grace comes to us and it feels annoying and it feels unfair. And when grace happens in this last chapter in the book of Jonah, you're going to see that grace is maybe not what we always expect or even want it to be. Now, if you've been tracking with the book of Jonah, you've probably realized by now that the writer of this book is both brilliant and satirical. This is meant, some of this is just meant to make you smile. Like if you read the book of Jonah and you're just all serious, you're kind of, you need to get over yourself because there's a fair bit of laughter in the way that this story is told. And some of it we'll see in chapter 4. Here's how chapter 3 ends and chapter 4 begins. The Ninevites have repented. So a nation of wickedness in a city known as a city of blood, a nation of wickedness has repented. And they turned from their evil ways, and God relented and did not bring upon them the destruction he had threatened. And you would think, if this was me, and I preached, in Jonah's case, a 5-word sermon, and 120,000 people and their animals repented, I would be pretty ecstatic. That would be a great day in the life of a pastor, wouldn't it? Here's what Jonah's doing. To Jonah, this seemed very wrong, and he became angry. Well, what does he do in his anger? He prays to the Lord. The first time he prayed, he was in the fish. Remember that? This time he prays to the Lord, and he says, isn't this what I said, Lord, when I was still back at home, before I ran away from you? This is what I tried to forestall by fish. I knew that you were a gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live. And the Lord replied, is it right for you to be angry? Now again, you got to smile at this a little bit. Come on. Did you ever sing that song as a kid? Everybody hates me. Nobody likes me. Everybody hates me. I'm going to the garden to eat worms. Like, have you ever had a good pouting party? You ever felt that? I know that you have. I see all these elbows going like this right in front of me. This is Jonah, right? You're thinking, what is with this guy? This should be the most wonderful thing that ever happened. And yet Jonah is angry. He's pouting. He's very upset. In fact, he says, this is so bad, I'm going to just die. I can't take this anymore. What's going on here? Jonah is discovering something about grace, and that is that grace is unfair. It's unfair. Here's how it works for Jonah. He's angry. He's deadly angry. He's pouting. But then we have to remember this. Why is Jonah upset? Maybe it's not that he's just sort of having a pity party. Maybe there's more going on here. And what helps us is if we remember that Jonah was part of the nation of Israel. And Nineveh was the capital of a nation called Assyria. And basically what had happened is Assyria was the most powerful nation at that time. They were known for their extreme violence, and they had taken captive Jonah's people. They had overtaken that portion of the world. And they captured them, and they demanded tribute from Jonah's people. And tribute was not like you need to pay a few taxes. Tribute for the Assyrians and for the people of Nineveh, that was the capital of Assyria, tribute meant that they would come in and take whatever they wanted from the Israelite people. So if they wanted food, they would just walk into your town, walk into your house, and take what they wanted. If they wanted children to go and be part of their army, they would just come in and take your children. If they wanted your spouse, if they wanted your wife, they would just take her. They would just take your possessions. They would just take your finances. Nineveh had humiliated Jonah's people. So Jonah had some baggage. You could put it this way. Jonah has been deeply hurt by these people. Likely relatives, family members who were killed or taken captive. Possibly relatives, friends that were raped or tortured or abused. And so here's Jonah watching Nineveh not face justice. And Jonah's like, they have deeply hurt me and my people, and they're probably going to do it in the future. And so Jonah is ticked. He's angry. It's like he looks at God and says, listen, your grace, that was nice for me, but not for them. They do not deserve it. Yes, you are patient with me, God, but I am not going to be patient with them. Yes, you forgave me, but I am not going to give them another chance. You gave me another chance. I am not going to give them another chance. Grace is not flowing out of me. Jonah is angry because he's been hurt. And isn't it true that it is very difficult to see the people that have hurt you get away with anything? Isn't that true? I didn't like it when it was my brother punching me in the back seat of the car, right? When people hurt you and then they just seem to get away with it, or worse yet, their life seems to just get better, you'd get angry too. Think of somebody, I know in a room this size, with this many of us here, you've been hurt. Some of you really seriously by other people. It might be abuse or a friend that betrayed you, a spouse that you can't trust, a financial business partner that took something from you, and you're angry and you're hurt. And I have people in my life that have hurt me too. And I have Jonah inside me saying, yes, God, thank you for your grace to me, but justice for them, please. Justice for them. In fact, Jonah feels this so strongly that he feels that the universe no longer makes sense. Because Nineveh is an evil city. They've done all of these awful things. And if God is a God of justice, how could he let Nineveh off? How could he do that? What kind of universe is it where evil does not get punished? Like where poor are trampled on, and where widows and orphans are exploited, and abusers and rapists can just repent and get off. What kind of a universe is it when the Creator does not punish evil? And because God relented, did not destroy Nineveh as Jonah expected, for Jonah, it's like everything that has been right and wrong in his life, the moral fiber, the moral fabric of his universe is beginning to unravel. It doesn't make sense he's so angry, I don't even want to live here anymore if this is the way this world works. He's angry enough to die. I do not want to be in a universe where there is a God who doesn't know how to be God. God was not fair to the Ninevites. He was gracious. And God was not fair to Jonah. He was gracious. And I'm guessing for a lot of us this is really hard to hear, like especially if you grew up in a house where everything was fair, right? And you are internally a justice seeker. You will probably always struggle of grace, because grace is always undeserved. Jonah's ticked. I get it. Jonah. I get it. But grace is also more than that. Notice what happens next. Jonah, he'd gone out. So God asks him, why are you angry? Jonah just leaves. He takes off. He sits at a place east of the city. He made himself a shelter, makes a little fort, sits in the shade. Okay, if you're in the Middle East, you want to be where there's shade. And he waited to see what would happen to the city. So you can kind of see Jonah in his self-righteousness. Now he's giving God another chance to get some revenge and justice. So Jonah is looking down at the city, waiting for it to burn, hoping it's a Sodom and Gomorrah kind of thing that's about to happen, and that God is going to let loose and bring some justice to this situation. But notice what happens next. Then the Lord provided a leafy plant. The King James Version calls it a gourd. I like that. I don't even know what a gourd is, but it's a leafy plant, I guess. And made it grow up over Jonah to give shade to his head to ease his discomfort. So if it's that hot, this is good news. And Jonah was very happy about the plant. Notice that phrase, because it's going to come up here a little bit later. Here's Jonah. The first time I think Jonah's ever been happy in this story. And he's happy about the gourd, like good gourd. Good gourd. There's a good gourd, and so Jonah is happy. Relief, thank you, God, doing something right. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm. Come on, you got to smile at some of this. God provided a worm which chewed the plant so that it withered. Now how does Jonah feel? Worse yet, the sun comes up, and then God provided. We see that 3 times. Provided. Another word for that would be appointed. God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. And if you've been to the Middle East and the sun is on your head, you know exactly how that could happen. And then Jonah says it again. It would be better for me to die than to live. So, God, here he is, appoints a comfort, a plant. Secondly, he appoints an agricultural disaster to the plant. And thirdly, he appoints a nasty weather pattern to bring discomfort to Jonah's life. So let me ask you this. Is it true that God brings trouble and discomfort and disaster into people's lives as a way of purifying them? Yes, it is. And that's because grace is refining. I don't know if you've thought about this. In this story, God is using troubles. He's appointing troubles. He's appointing worms and winds and gourds. and bringing circumstances to Jonah's life out of love. How do you feel about that? Well, I remember, I shouldn't give too many details. Maybe I'll just make it an imaginary story based on actual facts. How about that? When I was younger, well, let me put it this way. Have you ever loved somebody who was in a drunken state? Who drank so much alcohol that they were just, what do you do for that person, to that person, when they're in that state? If you love them. Well, if you love them, you go to them, right? You go to them. But you can't reason with them because they don't understand. They're incapacitated. You can't have a decent conversation. So you have to do things that they are not going to understand. And maybe even things that are going to make them mad and displeased with you, just like Jonah. In other words, you say to them, I'm sorry, you can't drive. You can't drive home. And what do they say? Do they calmly say, oh, I can see why you're doing this. I mean, I can't walk in a straight line. Of course you're doing this because you love me. No, they don't say that. They say, give me those keys back. Right? They say, I want the keys back. You're stealing my car. How dare you steal my car? I'm fine. I don't need this to happen. I can do it myself. But eventually, what do? You have to keep the keys away from them. Now, they might try to hit you. Hypothetically, when they swing, they'll miss because they're too drunk. And so you take the keys. And if they survive the night and you drive them home, maybe someday they will realize the purpose of what you did, and they will see that you did it out of love, and maybe they will say to you one day, if you hadn't done that, like, I'm sorry I took a swing at you, but if you hadn't done that, I don't know where I would be today. I'm not even sure I would be here. Do you see? Imagine God saying, I have a desire for your life as a man, as a woman, at this season of your life. I see who you can be. I see the possibility, the thing that you most want to do with your life and be with your life. I can see it. You want to be a person of strength. I can see it in you, a person of love and compassion and justice and freedom and grace. I can see all of those things inside of you. Therefore, I am going to make your life rough now. In Jonah's case, the way he does that is he brings a worm to wreck the vine or to get rid of the gourd. And what's a gourd? Well, for us, if we were to kind of jump into this story a little bit, we would say our gourd would be anything that we put our trust in, the thing that makes us happy, the thing that we value more than what God values. The Old Testament way of saying it would be an idol. And it's probably going to be something good. I don't know if you have vines in your life. They make you really, really happy. Maybe it's your family. Maybe it's your children. Maybe it's your spouse. Maybe it's your grandchildren. Maybe it's your accomplishments. Something that gives you a complete sense of this is exactly what I want in life. Things that you have done, relationships that you have, your resume, your accomplishments, the things that make you who you are. There's a story of two lumberjacks who were going into a forest, and they had to clear the entire forest. This was their mission. And as they were about to clear this forest, they noticed that there was a mother bird making her nest in one of the trees. And they didn't want her to see her do that because they knew what was coming. And so they knew that she would, if she stayed there, if she rested in that tree, that awful things would happen to her. And they didn't want her or her baby birds to be killed. And so flatted their axe, they went up to the tree, the tree started to vibrate, and the bird got really uncomfortable and decided to move on. Went to another tree. They followed her to the next tree because they knew that they were going to mow down all these trees. Took the flat of their axe, bounded on each side of the tree started to shake. The mother, she started to realize, I'm not going to be in this tree after tree after tree, till finally she goes and rests and starts making her nest in a rock. And then they let her alone. Is it possible that whatever you're struggling with this morning, the things that you are going through right now, is it possible that God's grace, his refining grace, is shaking your tree? He's rattling it. You're like, why do I have these physical troubles? Why do I have these relational troubles? What's with my job and my finances? Like, what is going on? Maybe God is saying, if you want to become the person that both you and I know you can be, you have to not rest and find your identity in these kinds of things, because if you do, there will be a disaster. Emotionally, you'll be up, you'll be down, you'll never have a joy beyond circumstances, you'll get criticism and it'll devastate you, you'll get kind words and they'll throw you way up, you'll be like this. And maybe, after enough shaking and rattling, you'll get to the point where someday you'll look back and you'll say, you know, God, if you hadn't done that to me, I don't know what I would have done. And I don't know where I would be today. We need to understand this idea that grace is refining, because, in fact, it's like a perspective that we have to have in this world. Because if you don't have this perspective as a follower of Jesus, if you just walk through this world without the concept of refining grace, you will go one way or the other. One way you'll kind of deny that life is hard. You'll pretend that, it's always going to get better. It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. Or the other side, you'll be completely devastated by everything. And you'll be an emotional wreck when things go difficult for you. But as Christians, we have a different perspective, a third perspective that says grace is actually refining. You don't have to deny the hardness of life, and you don't have to be devastated by it. There are things that happen that God will use to refine you, and that's what he does with Jonah, because that's how grace works. Well, last one. Come to the end of this story in Jonah chapter 4. Watch what happens next. Well, first let's pause on this one. God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry? Great question. Wonder if God would ask you that too. Is it right? What are you ticked off about these days? Like, what ticks you off? I'm not going to bring up politics. I'm not going to bring up all those things. What is it that's upsetting you? Can you imagine God coming down to your level and just saying, is it right for you to be angry about that? Oh, he asked Jonah, and Jonah's like, yes, it's right for me to be angry about that. So angry I'm going to die. And then God says this, he kind of brings it all home for us and for Jonah. He says, Jonah, listen, you've been concerned about this plant. You had a gourd on the brain. Though you did not tend it, you did not make it grow, it came up and left in one day. And then this, and should I not have concern for the great city, the word great city is used over and over again in the book of Jonah, in which there are more than 120,000 people who can't tell their right hand from their left hand. They don't have a compass. They're just like little children. They don't know. And also many animals. Come on, what a great way to end the book. You have to smile at that. Also many animals. So here is God. Can you see it? In the gentlest way possible, he is giving to Jonah what Jonah refused to give to the Ninevites. And that is patience and acceptance and forgiveness. It's like God coming to Jonah and say, listen, Jonah, I gave grace to the Ninevites in spite of their violence. And Jonah, I'm going to give you grace in spite of your self-righteousness. Does this remind you of the prodigal son story at all? The Ninevites ran away like the younger son. You know, they're evil, they're wrong, and God gives them tremendous grace. The older son, what does he do? He stayed with the father the whole time, and yet he gets ticked off when the younger son gets grace. It's amazing, isn't it? It's very hard to stop being the younger son and not become the older son. It's very hard. to not become self-righteous and look down on other people, and to forget that there's grace for two kinds of people: those who sin by running away from God, and those who sin by staying near to God but withdrawing their hearts from God, not aligning their hearts with God. You could put it this way: grace is for all, Jonah, all. Look, Jonah, look what you're weeping about. Look what you're ticked off about. But then look what I'm weeping about, God says. Like, look who you love, Jonah, primarily yourself and your people, and look who I love, all people. You could put it this way: Jonah had come to the place where he'd reduced his life to himself, that the love that he had, he turned inward to what he was feeling, turned inward to himself and to his people and to his private little world. But God's love went out. It always flows out to the unfamiliar, to the unwashed, to the undeserving. The grace just flows from God, whereas Jonah has tried to contain it. He's forgotten people matter to God. He puts it this way: Jonah, listen, you're attached to a plant. I'm attached to people. And there's no place on earth that has more people than a city. Now, I've wrestled with this part a lot because I grew up on a farm, and frankly, I feel like that's the best place to live. But Jonah challenges me. God challenged me. Why would God be so concerned about 120,000 people? Well, the average city in those days, historians tell us, would be about 3,000. So God is saying that if you love people, you have to love cities, because there's so many people in them. Do you see? That the city is the place where there's more people than there is plants. The farm is the place where there's more plants than there is people. Right? That's the way it is. And because God is more concerned, because God loves people more than plants, he has to love the city more than he loves the countryside, which is a terrible thing to say out loud, but I just did it. Why? Think about Calgary. What do we have? 1.4 million people here? Lots of people. There is more per inch. There's more image of God per square inch in Calgary than there is in rural Alberta. Isn't that true? And Jonah, you've shrunk your life down to yourself. But life is not about you. It's not about your anger. It's not about your sense of fairness, your sense of justice, your happiness, your unforgiveness. Life is about Nineveh. Because life is about people. And there are people in that city. And people are what matter to me, God is saying. Put it another way, life is about Calgary and Edmonton and Winnipeg and Ottawa. Life is about Nineveh because life is about people created in the image of God, loved by God. I wonder if you've forgotten that, have you? We live in a weird time in history where we can design our lives to just circle around ourselves and the people we like and the people who like us. And maybe the challenge is to say, listen, go to Nineveh. Go to the people. You say, well, what is Nineveh? Well, Nineveh is anybody you lock eyes with. Even right after this service. Anybody you look at. Anybody that you see. Because Nineveh is the place where the people are. So people are what matter to God. Do they matter to us? Do people matter more than plants? Than the thing that brings you happiness? Imagine a group of people who would say, listen, I'll do what Jonah didn't do. I'll go to Nineveh. No matter what it costs me, no matter how unfair I think it is to give them grace, I will go. Because right outside these doors, people are lonely, and people don't have hope, and people don't have families, and people have broken lives. And so, yes, I'll go there. I'll invite another family for dinner. I'll mow their lawn. I'll paint their house. I'll go for coffee with people when I'd rather stay inside and watch Netflix, because people matter to God, and my heart is beginning to line up with God's heart. All people matter to God. He has deep compassion for them. We divide people up in so many weird ways. We do it politically, we do it racially, we do it culturally. We divide up all of these people, and God, he doesn't see it like that. Every single person. You heard this phrase in Dave's announcement about nations and generations. Every nation, every generation, no matter what has happened in a person's life, they matter to God. And because they matter to God, he has this deep, the phrase there was compassion, this deep yearning in his stomach for them. Because he has that deep yearning for them, he puts it into action. And what does he do? He takes the concept of grace and he puts it in the form of a person born in a manger named Jesus. And grace walks among us. And grace basically goes from one person to another one who's messed up and broken and undeserving, tax collectors, sinners, adulterers, the self-righteous. And Jesus goes to them over and over and over again until he comes to the end of his life. And then what happens? That grace faces the worst evil that could ever be faced. And the Bible tells us that the sins of the world, both the sins of the wicked Ninevites and both the sin, self-righteous Jonahs, all to Jesus, coalesced into him, put on to him at the cross. And what happens? He takes in all that evil. And by the power of grace, overcomes it with love. And he's in the tomb, and then what takes place? Everyone thinks that's it. It's over. And then 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, the same God who on the third day spoke to a fish and had him bring forth Jonah, that same God on the third day spoke to a stone, and the stone rolled away. And Jesus walked out of the tomb, and grace came back to life. And what happened next? A new community was formed, a grace-filled community. And it was a community, like historians tell us, there's never been a community like this. The results of Jesus rising from the dead created a community, a space of grace in this world where people who were radically different and hated each other, this is one of the great evidences of the resurrection, people who hated each other for generations got together and treated each other with grace, Gentiles and Jews. There were slaves there. There were free people there. There were men there. There were women there. There were Romans there. They were all gathered together. There were barbarians there. They all came together in this place where it said, people matter. Doesn't matter what you've been through. Doesn't matter what you did. You matter. Because that's what grace says. You could put it this way. There's lots of names for the church. Now, I think, again, I don't know if we should change our name as a church, but I wish we had a tagline at least that said, a place of grace. Space for grace. Because grace still happens. I see it in our church family. When those of you who don't have a lot of exceedingly generous. When those of you who have been hurt take communion with the person who has hurt you. When we accept people from different faiths, from different moral compasses, when we accept people who are very different, grace, it happens. Dave was talking about a building. Listen, here's my philosophy of buildings. I like them if they're spaces of grace. Do we need more spaces of grace in this city? Absolutely. Absolutely. What is this? It's a space for grace, isn't it? Grace happens